Welcome to Building the Future. I'm your host, Kevin Horick. You can check out new episodes of the show every Tuesday and Thursday at 2 p.m. If you missed an episode or want to get more information about the show, please visit buildingthefutureshow.com. Welcome back to the show. Today we have Doug Johnson. He's the president and executive recruiter at Valor Partners. Doug, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show. I think what you guys are doing is actually really interesting, but maybe before we kind of get into that, let's get to know you a little bit better and kind of start off with where you grew up.
Sure. I grew up in northern Minnesota. I was about 100 miles away from the Canadian border, so effectively sure. I was in the middle of nowhere.
Sure, man, sure. So walk me through kind of how you got passionate about you were a pro tennis player, correct?
I was a teaching pro. I was never good enough to play on the tour, but I was passionate enough about it to help other people learn the game.
Okay, so how did
I coached.
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, so I coached all over the country with some pretty neat people.
Sure. So how did you kind of fall in love with tennis early up?
Good question. I grew up in a community that was a hockey playing community. I mean,
Sure.
Most of Minnesota is a hockey playing community, but northern Minnesota is especially passionate about it. And most of my friends were hockey players. I was never big enough or fast enough or skilled enough to play the game at the high school level or certainly beyond that. So I needed to find something to do, and for whatever reason, my dad put a tennis racket in my hand at a pretty early age, and I just started playing. I enjoyed it as much as probably anybody, and one of the things I would find myself doing early on in northern Minnesota when we still had snow on the tennis courts into April, which would have been our high school season, is I would grab the shovel and I would get dropped off the tennis courts, and I would shovel off the courts, anything that I could do to sort of get out and start playing a little bit sooner. That was pretty typical of most years.
Sure. I think that's great. So you went to university and took psychology, right? Correct?
That is correct.
So what made you kind of go to university and take that?
Well, I actually started in engineering. I was sort of going to follow in the footsteps of my dad. We've got quite a few engineers in my family, and what I found was that with the class load my freshman year and the tennis practice schedule and tennis match schedule and all of the traveling, that it was just too much. And I didn't enjoy the heavy math and sciences. I could do it, but the amount of time that it took and the lack of enjoyment sort of pushed me in a different direction. So then I actually turned my attention. I thought I would be a business major, and I found that I disliked that even more than engineering. But I was taking psychology elective courses, and I found that I really enjoyed those. So that's where I ended up going and where I got my degree in.
Sure. No, I think that's great. So you also basically, how did you go from kind of being in the psychology sports world into kind of founding your own kind of company?
So it's a good question. So when I was doing my graduate work out in California, I was studying clinical sports psychology, which was effectively the study of performance. And at the time, the dream or the idea was get the degree, which is a pretty unusual degree at the time, go out, work with professional athletes, have a lot of fun. And what I found was that after I got my degree, I did some work with high school and college athletes. I talked to a lot of professional teams, and what I kept being told over and over and over again was that in the world of guaranteed contracts, those guys, they were already getting paid, and that at that point, there was a stigma, a negative one, that was attached with anything having to do with psychology. As a general rule, it's much more accepted now to work with a sports psychologist or a performance anybody that would work on sort of mental performance around the game to get a competitive edge.
Right.
But back when I got my degree, which was in the mid-'90s, not so much. So the people that had the ability to pay me had less interest in working with me.
Interesting.
So that career never really took off, unfortunately. But what I did find was that the same aspects of athletic performance and optimal performance in athletics absolutely apply to business. And I get to use them every day still.
Interesting. So I know, like, just kind of you worked at some companies and whatnot, but I kind of want to get into what exactly do you guys do at Valor, and kind of how do you guys kind of take what you learned in the sports world and bring it into the business world? Because I feel like there's a lot of industries, sports being one of them, into business, and I think kind of like being a musician kind of plays into the startup kind of tech world as well, and we can get into that, and I kind of want your opinion on that as well a little bit later.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you guys kind of do at Valor, and how are you guys kind of tie in the sports into kind of the business world?
Okay. So we're an executive search firm. We started in 2002.
Okay.
We work almost exclusively with technology companies of varying sizes. I mean, we worked with monstrous companies like Microsoft and SAP and Salesforce.com, and then we worked with little tiny companies that are trying to just get their funding and trying to find a couple of key executives and really everything in between.
Sure.
And that's pretty much what we've done since we got started. The tie-in to sports is probably less of a sports tie-in and more of a performance tie-in.
Okay, interesting.
There's a lot of ways that organizations can go about the business of finding talent. The challenges have remained the same and probably will remain the same for years to come, which is, when you get into the business of finding the right person, that encompasses a lot of different characteristics. You've got to have the right background and the right experience. Sometimes that it's in the right industry or selling to the right audience or the right customer base to have the greatest value. But even if you find that stuff, you've still got to have the right timing. You've still got to have the right things to be able to offer that candidate that will effectively get that individual interested enough to leave their current employer. I think one of the things that's a little bit different about us versus other firms, although you'll see this with quite a few search firms, is that rarely are we working with people that are unemployed.
Sure.
Our clients engage us most of the time to go out and find the best talent that we can find, and most of the time, the vast majority of the time, that includes people that are working someplace else, and oftentimes with competitors. So we've really got to understand, what it is that drives somebody, what their career goals are. We really have to understand our candidate first before we can determine, do we have a fit or a match between this individual and the opportunity that we're being asked to help fill.
Sure. So how do you guys, and you don't have to kind of give me away all your secrets around that, but how do you guys even kind of start that search? Because do you go to LinkedIn? Do you use other kind of networks? Have you guys how do you guys kind of find those candidates? Because I think in certain cases, some people, especially if they've been at a job a long time or they're pretty high up, they don't even really spend time kind of networking in the recruitment space or kind of looking for a job, or maybe even promoting themselves online.
Correct. Yeah. Most people. So what you're striking at is the primary and fundamental difference between what search firms do and what, for example, a recruiting agency might do, or what an organization might get on their own by placing a job ad or a job posting somewhere. But the first thing we really do is we engage our client in a conversation about what is it that they're trying to find. What is the goal that they're trying to accomplish? Really, what is it that they need this person to help them do or help them achieve. That's the first thing, because the best indicator, if you're a believer anyway, that the best indicator of future performance is past performance, and an organization has a certain objective, then finding somebody that has done that before and can see around some of the corners that are inevitably going to come, that's critically important, because that shortens sort of the number of errors that might be made along the way, but it also shortens the up-to-speed time and the potential to make a positive impact more quickly. So the first thing we do is we engage in that conversation, really get to understand not only what our client's looking for, but also some aspects about the company, the culture, the individual that this person is going to report to, what their personality is, what their likes and dislikes are. Because it doesn't matter, Kevin, if I presented you with your dream job and everything sounded great, and you went and met with the person that you were going to be working with and for, and you didn't like the person, doesn't matter how good the fit is.
Sure.
I mean, even if you were to take the job every day, you're going to be miserable working for this horrible person that you don't get along with. It's a recipe for disaster. So we do take a lot of time to really get to know our clients and what matter to them. And for us, I mean, it's never been about the fee. I mean, let's make no mistake. Executive recruiters can do fairly well financially, and some people would look at how much we charge on a search by search basis, and shake their head at what those fees are sometimes. But it's really about the value that we help to create. And if we don't get the right fit, it doesn't matter how much or how little we might make. It's going to be short-lived.
Sure.
We're not going to create the value that we were brought in to create in the first place. So our objective here has always been, let's make a great match. Let's find the right person where we can sort of elevate the candidate's career, help our client achieve the goals that they have in mind, and then everything else is sort of the byproduct. So when your driver is just a successful outcome, certainly helps to make every day a little bit more enjoyable.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. So do you guys kind of have your own internal database then of people that you've kind of worked with before? Because why I ask that is I look at, like, for example, a startup, and if you bring in, I don't know, it doesn't really matter, but like you bring in like a CEO to take the company from, say, like 0 to, I don't know, like a certain period, at some point that person either might not be the person to get to kind of the next level. And by next level, I don't necessarily mean financial. It's just at a certain point,
Right.
Like everybody kind of has a skill set. And I think at some point that person, they're not really, they don't, either maybe they don't want to, or they're not qualified, or they've never done it, where they've gone from kind of like, like if I got you guys to hire me like a CEO, and I want to go from like, drawing on a napkin to my first like 100,000 users or something. But like I might need a CEO after that, where just because that have been kind of through it before, to grow to kind of the next level, or and maybe I need kind of different people at different levels in a company, but that doesn't mean that that person, once they're kind of done growing with where I need them to go, that it might just be kind of for them to move on. So do you guys kind of keep a database of people that you're like, like, here's this guy for a few years, or girl for a few years, that can really go from A to Z in this kind of growth space that you're looking to go, and then maybe we'll swap you in somebody later. And I think the best example is like, obviously, like the two Google founders, they kind of brought in like Eric Schmidt for a number of years to kind of take them to the next level, and then he kind of stepped down, and now there's like a new guy in place, and his name escapes me, of course it does right now. But do you know what I'm kind of getting at? That there's different kind of people that have been through different things as the lifespan of a company as they get bigger.
Yeah, those things that you're describing play to somebody's skill set and experience, and usually also plays to what they enjoy or love about their work. And what you're talking about, those transitions are pretty normal, especially in the software world.
Sure.
We work with a lot of organizations where oftentimes you'll have a technologist founder who really understands and is very passionate about the technology that they've created.
Okay.
And they'll wrap a company around it. Somebody will listen to their vision and their passion about what it is that this stuff will help companies to do, and will give them millions of dollars to go out and sort of grow the technology and productize it, maybe monetize it. But at the end of the day, a lot of those folks they're not business people. They don't know how to scale a company. They don't know how to hire sales and marketing and engineering and administrative people and all that. That's just not their gig. So they take it as far as they can take it, and then investors, board, oftentimes the founders themselves realize this is as far as I can take this thing.
Sure.
So those transitions are really normal. I mean, it's a different skill set to take a company from, say, 0 to 10 million or 0 to 20 million versus a company from 20 million to 100 million. That's just a different skill set.
Sure. Or to go to IPO or stuff like that, right?
Yeah, you'll often see companies that stare down the sort of the barrel of what's our goal. If our goal is an IPO 2 years from now, what are the strategic pieces we need to put in place now? For example, if that's your time frame, if you're within that sort of 24-month horizon to a potential IPO, or that's the plan, you want to get a CFO in place that has that experience, that's done S1 paperwork, that's done the road show, that understands that stuff. Because the last thing you want to do is show the marketplace or those groups that are going to take you public sort of inconsistency or a lack of stability around the finance position. That's one of those positions you absolutely want stabilized. So CEOs and boards will often go out with that being the plan, find a CFO that has gone through that IPO process previously and bring that person in well in advance of that actually happening. That's just one example.
Sure.
But those sorts of transitions happen all the time.
Sure. And you guys kind of help with that kind of stuff?
Yeah. I mean, we don't have any single specialization around saying, for example, our specialty is to work with companies in growth phase where they've got to be X amount of revenue, but if they hit whatever 100 million or 200 million, we're done working with them. We've worked with companies at all stages, and the ability to go out and find the right people is often not based on having a great network of contacts, though I like to think that we've got a pretty good network of contacts. But it's the ability to really listen to the client, what they need, and then help to mark the map or to map the market of potential candidates, and then get those people on the phone. And these days, the biggest challenge I think that we've found in recruiting today versus even 2 or 3 years ago is that people don't use the phone anymore.
Yeah, fair.
And the phone is absolutely critical to what it is that we're trying to accomplish. I mean, we can't get to know somebody by reading their LinkedIn profile. We can't get to know somebody by exchanging 10 emails with them. That's not helpful.
Sure.
That's the biggest challenge. And I think for organizations out there, they probably find the same to be true, is that a lot of times they're relying on internal recruiters, and those internal recruiters have challenges over and above what I might have in terms of getting in contact with somebody. It's a real challenge to get people to engage in a conversation these days.
Sure. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. So we've obviously, and the space I know the most is kind of the software space, and you guys do kind of recruitment in other spaces as well. So how does kind of the healthcare and the industrial space how do you guys kind of work with companies in those spaces? Is it kind of a similar process, or is it a bit different, or does it really depend on kind of what the company is looking for?
The process itself is absolutely the same.
Okay.
And the process is the same whether we're talking about finding a C-level executive or a vice president or an individual contributor. We still have to do the same things. We still have to pull the same levers. We still have to go out and do our market research and reach out to lots and lots of people and engage them in conversation and qualify them in or out, evaluate their background, skills, fit, all of those things. So the process is is really the same, no matter what industry we're working in or what potential position we might be working on.
Sure. No, that makes sense. And I kind of figured that. I've always just kind of been, I guess, curious with that, because obviously the person is usually working in a space you're recruiting for. Do you find that the skills that you're recruiting for can kind of go between the different industries?
That's a lot dependent upon two things. I mean, one is what is the position, and two, where are the interests of the candidate. I think the most important thing to sort of think about here is that when somebody engages an executive search firm, really what they're doing is they're trying to do a couple of things. One, have a fair level of confidence that the person that's out talking to people in the space knows more than they do. So every day I'm in the market talking to people about what's happening at certain companies, what companies are doing well, what companies are doing poorly. So I'm loaded up with all this industry information that for the people that are working inside of an organization, I mean, they're busy working. Their job isn't to pay attention to all of the things that my job is to pay attention to. So, these organizations are engaging me for a level of expertise that I can bring, but they're really engaging me to mitigate risk. So, a company is relying on me to bring them somebody that ideally has done the job or is doing the job they need done today. And the idea is that if they can find somebody that understands the job, has done it, has been successful, that will mitigate their risk of not being successful or of failure in adding this person to the organization. And that's important when you're talking about people that are going to impact the bottom line to the tune of millions of dollars a lot of the time.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. So I know we've kind of talked about this before in a previous chat we had, but you guys have focused on kind of female leadership and kind of diversity in kind of the workplace. And I know that's kind of been a hot topic in the last, couple of years, I would say. And it seems even just in 2017, there's been kind of a bunch of kind of good and bad publicity kind of around it. And so I'm kind of curious to know your guys' take on kind of how you guys kind of see that, because I think, in my opinion, the more diversity you have with people of all different backgrounds, the better and stronger your company is. But how do you guys kind of recruit that? Because I think that adds another layer of complexity when somebody's looking for somebody with a certain skill set while trying to make their team as diverse as possible.
Yeah. So it's an interesting subject, and I sort of focused on this or started focusing on it a couple of years ago when I had a global C-level executive at a Fortune 500 company specifically request that I find female candidates for the two searches that she wanted me to take on. It wasn't a if you stumble across some people, we'd really appreciate some diversity in our candidate field. It was, you must bring me female candidates. Okay. It was a must. And it was in that conversation that I started to look back on previous conversations with other clients that had requested the same, something that I hadn't really paid attention to. Because it was more at the end of the conversation, we'd go through all the characteristics and background that an organization or executive might want in their next candidate for this search that they were asking me to take on. And it was sort of one of those elbow in the ribs, hey, by the way, if you happen to have some female candidates or if you could find some women for this role, that'd be really great. But it wasn't a strict requirement. But it got me thinking about what is that, and then I sort of immersed myself in the subject of gender and business, because when I'm focusing on diversity, I mean, there's lots of categories of diversity.
Sure.
For me, I really focus on women in tech. I don't know, I can't really point to anything that drives me. Yeah, I've got a daughter, and of course I've got a mother, and
Sure.
I've been around women my entire life, but it wasn't anything that really drove me around that subject matter. But the more women that I talk to about helping them to advance their careers or helping them to build their teams, there started to be some pretty consistent themes just in terms of sort of what they had to deal with in working in tech. And I'm sure it's the same for lots of fields, but I only work in the tech industry. But the stories were all, for all intents and purposes, Kevin, they were all the same.
Sure.
Just about every woman that I talked to, almost without exception, had some horror story of working with men, or stuff that would be stereotypic. Oh, we've set up a meeting, it's going to be at the local strip club. That sort of thing it's so commonplace. You can't even believe it. And there would be a lot of men and maybe some women out there that would shake their head and say, oh, that doesn't really happen. And I'm here to tell you, it happens a lot.
Sure.
And
or they're just not invited, right? Maybe.
Oh, no. They're absolutely invited.
Okay.
And that's sort of the real shame of it, is that these are important business meetings that are just oftentimes set up in the most inappropriate ways, or
Sure.
with the most inappropriate circumstances or settings, and it's really pretty ridiculous. And I'm not going to change that. I mean, there's some guy, I promise you it's a guy, that thinks that that's a good idea, and it's a horrible idea. And it's a really complex problem to solve, because what you're really doing is you're really having to get into the minds of people and change them, which
Sure.
is really hard to do. So to some degree, one of the things that we're trying to do here within our business with all of our clients is to work with organizations that, one, feel like gender diversity inside of their organizations is an important thing, and then we make every effort that we can to make sure that we include highly qualified female candidates into all of our searches. And one of the challenges in tech is that women are just vastly outnumbered by men.
Sure.
And so you get into this unique challenge for companies where they've got an open position. It would take half the time to find a qualified slate of male candidates, but then to add a qualified female candidate or multiple female candidates to make it even more challenging just takes that much time. So if it's a critical to fill because we're going to lose revenues or customers or what have you sort of equation that they're trying to solve, it can be really tricky, because they know that they could fill it with a man quickly, and even if they get female candidates, I mean, they still might go with a man. But statistically, as weird as this might sound, if you have, for example, a short list of 4, 2 are men, 2 are women, 50% of the time a woman's going to get hired. Weird how that turns out.
Yeah,
but there's been all kinds of studies around that.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, no, the whole space kind of fascinates me, because like I have a daughter myself, and she's 3, so she's long ways away from kind of entering the workforce. But it's something that I start kind of at least thinking about, or you need to at least kind of start talking to her about at some point, or basically telling her you can do whatever you want to do, and I'll support you with that. But you're right, to your point, like if a company does things that are kind of inappropriate, like a meeting spot or business whatever, it doesn't really matter. Like, how do you deal with that or not deal with that? And the thing that I keep coming back to is, obviously there's certain people, and I'm sure everybody has one either in their family or knows somebody, friend of a friend, or it doesn't really matter, that is very against kind of changing their archaic beliefs, for lack of a better term for it. And I guess the argument that I always bring to them is, like, take pretty much like Apple and Google, the 2 most valuable companies on the planet, are spending a lot of time, and they're not perfect, I'm not trying to say that, but they're spending a lot of time trying to add diversity, whether it's male, female, just people of different kind of nationalities and backgrounds and from different parts of the world, so they can actually basically understand those different types of people and be able to make their products and services better for kind of a global audience, right? And I think it's kind of naive for companies to not start thinking about kind of the global marketplace, especially if you're in tech, right? Like there's so many more people in other parts of the world that have never been to North America, maybe will never even go to North America, but and North American culture's obviously kind of come over, and as they're getting more and more people online, they're going to start seeing everything that's happening, because you could basically with a click of a button read the news and walk the streets of any country in the world now basically with Street View. That I think more and more people you're just kind of limiting yourself, because it could be potential customers or audience or whatever you're kind of going after. It just seems kind of crazy to not care about this global market that we've basically opened up with the internet. Is that fair to say, or is there holes in my kind of statement there?
No, I think that's one way to look at it. A lot of it has to do with your audience, but when I say your audience, I mean whatever that particular company's customer base. But for example, in Europe, you've got a lot of European companies or countries that require a certain percentage of women on boards, or a certain percentage of women in leadership teams. You don't see that in the U.S. yet. It may happen. It may never happen. But it's matching your audience, matching your customer base. I mean, you want your company to look like the population that you serve. And the interesting thing, a lot of spending decisions. I mean, women in the U.S. control tons of spend, far more than men, and yet in a lot of organizations that are creating the products or services that those women are buying, like all of us are buying, you've got a bunch of men that are responsible for marketing and responsible for creation and responsible for all of these things that women are looking at saying, oh, that doesn't resonate with me. And no big shock when you've got a whole bunch of men that are trying to think about these products and these solutions through the lens of the male eye, when their customer base is, largely women a lot of the time.
Sure. Well, and in just like even the markets you guys play in, like, software and healthcare and kind of the industrials, like everybody needs to build products that appeal to kind of anybody on the planet for the most part, right? Like most people nowadays use the internet, and more people are coming on. Like pretty much everybody needs healthcare or comes in contact with a doctor at some point, right? Like it doesn't really, age, gender, race doesn't really matter in that sense, right? Or kind of some of the, even hardware stuff, like you need to build you can clearly see whether something's kind of designed, whether it's more kind of male or female looking, right? Like, and I don't say one's better than the other. It's just like traditionally there's certain things that appeal more to male or females based on just like kind of look and feel, right?
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think a lot of the challenge is that it's a lot of what you're talking about when it comes to gender is very subtle. I mean, I have yet in 20 years of executive search to have anybody verbalize, I don't want to hire a woman. Nobody's going to say that. And yet you've got all kinds of studies out there. For example, if in some of these different settings where researchers are measuring different things, if there's a man and a woman who have each accomplished similar things, both men and women perceive that the man should get more credit. I mean, it's ridiculous stuff like that. It's just sort of insidious, and it creeps in everywhere, and there's all this bias and things like that most people aren't even aware of. I think by and large the stories that we hear about, when it's sexual harassment, and I think that there's far more of that than happens than we would ever realize, or that would ever be, talked about in the news or written about in different publications.
Sure.
That stuff happens a lot, but by and large, most men are, I mean, they don't look at gender, or they don't look at whatever that characteristic might be. Most of these company leaders that I've interacted with and experienced, they are interested in talent as the primary driver. Who's the best person for this role? And oftentimes, there are characteristics that are more important than talent or experience. There's just things that they need somebody to bring to the organization, whether there's cultural aspects around we need more energy, or maybe they need less energy.
Sure.
Or they just, there's something that they need that experience and sort of what somebody's done in their career gets trumped by one of those other characteristics.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I think the other thing too that I've always kind of thought was interesting was you don't understand how important experience is until you have it. Like, that's always something that I've always kind of, like, I'm a millennial. I'm 34, so I'm like just a millennial, I guess. But that's always kind of been interesting to me because I've been in the software space a long time, and just watching kind of new grads come out of school and they work under you, and they have great ideas, but sometimes it's like those ideas just can't be executed for a handful of reasons, not good or bad. It's just, but if somebody, and it's usually somebody with experience, basically crushing their dreams a little bit, saying no, we can't do that for these reasons. And I've found, even in my own experience, that like sometimes you don't understand, and then as you get older and you're more in your career, you understand. You're like, oh yeah, okay, I totally get why like I couldn't do that back in the day. And then you have to be the one sometimes making those calls. And that's always been kind of interesting to me when you kind of look at the whole space and you're like, okay, well, we can't do this for this reason or that reason, or budget or timeline or whatever. There could be a handful of reasons, right? And so I think the struggle and the point that I'm just trying to get is sometimes you need to go to somebody like you guys to find somebody with that experience sometimes, right? Because your internal, people might just not have the experience in the organization to do that. And I'm assuming that you guys help with that quite a bit. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
yeah,
no, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. It's okay.
I was just going to say that there's a really interesting dynamic that's happening, and it's going to continue happening for, I think, until 2027 or something like that, which is that this baby boomer generation is retiring, and the statistic is mind blowing. The number of people that statistically retire every day and will retire every day until that date is like 10,000 a day.
Wow.
It's crazy, and that started that's a 19-year generation, so it started early 2012, 2011, something like that. That's the statistic, and it's pretty accurate. In which you've got effectively our three generations. So you've got that baby boomer generation that's retiring and nearing the sunset of their careers, even if they haven't retired yet. And you've got that group in the middle, and then you've got to sort of get this millennial group up to speed. And to your point around experience, it's been a sort of interesting transition with how SaaS software, or this software as a service versus a classic license model, has taken over. And a lot of the companies that are selling SaaS applications today are doing so with a completely different methodology, which is they're not building big sales teams of outside salespeople who are sort of classically trained at doing discovery and uncovering needs and selling value. That model is just different. So a lot of times the sales process today is sell over the phone, sell via webinar or video, and typically what they're bringing in are sort of young, inexperienced, but the thought is being high energy, that are willing to sort of bang the phone or send 1,000 emails every day, and that might work. But what a lot of companies are starting to discover, and I hate to say this and paint with this broad brush, but I will tell you that I've got multiple tech companies that I work with whose most senior executives have said to me point blank, "Do not bring me a millennial."
No, fair enough.
And Yeah, and the reason that they're saying that has everything to do with exactly what you're talking about, which is a lack of experience, not only in doing the work, but a lack of experience around even what work is.
Sure.
So the people that are making those hiring decisions are used to work being defined a certain way, and millennials just view work differently in many cases. And, that's great, but it doesn't serve them when the audience that is going to be hiring them expects something different than what it is that they think. So I think oftentimes what you've got to find is the characteristics that everybody seeks, which are people that have drive and passion and are willing to work hard. And unfortunately, the view of a lot of millennials is that they just aren't willing to work hard. And I know that for people that might be listening to this right now who say, "Oh, that's not really fair," I didn't say it, but a lot of my clients have absolutely said it.
But see, I love the fact that you're willing to kind of openly say that. And to be honest, I love when people say that about the millennial generation, because the thing that I see that is like, at least for me, I need some sort of kind of like motivator to prove people wrong. And so
right.
For me, for the people that actually, and maybe people will get mad at me for saying this, but I think the thing that people are forgetting is and to your client's point, like if they're looking for a certain type of person or skill set or both, and if I want to work for that company or that person, and if I don't kind of accept that or kind of, whatever that is, then I might not be able to work. And at the end of the day, it's the people that are willing to kind of suck it up and do it, or kind of, I think a better way to put it is, it's a hell of a lot easier to be kind of a rebel in the system than trying to change the entire system to fit kind of your mindset. And people might hate me for saying that, but I've been more successful in my career going that route than trying to change everything around you, because that's never going to happen, right? Like unless you run your own company and you hire your own people, then you can't really expect other companies that are looking for a different viewpoint to kind of hire you. I think that's kind of totally ludicrous, right? At least in my experience. Yeah. And as a millennial, like I love when people say like, you're lazy and you're garbage. And it's like, okay, well, you're basing that on kind of a general thing. But I also kind of like that the bar is basically set. There is no bar. Like the bar is basically like on the ground. And if you pick up the bar, or you like actually show people that you care and you're willing to, like work your ass off, that the people that are willing to do that as kind of a millennial are going to go way further than the people that are just like, nah, I'm just going to wait around until, people change to my way of thinking. So for me, I think that's almost been like the greatest thing that's ever happened to my generation, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I don't know that that's fair. I think probably every generation has some stereotype that,
well, I think every generation has people
gets
that
applied
are lazy,
to them,
right? And I think every
Sure.
generation has people that are workaholics and we're willing to do everything and sacrifice everything to climb the corporate ladder. And I don't think one's necessarily better than the other. It's just you can't complain if you don't kind of make yourself hireable in today's market. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And so it's interesting, and I'm curious to know your kind of take on this, because I've always kind of I usually around Christmas time or early in the new year, every year, I try to go read job postings of the industry that I'm in, and I say like, okay, do I know these skills? Do I need to learn some new stuff or whatnot? And then I kind of reevaluate, okay, maybe I should learn or look into these few things and then decide if I want to kind of learn that or not learn that to stay kind of relevant. And I don't think that has anything to do with age or kind of generation. I think if you want to stay current, you need to be constantly kind of learning and updating yourself, or at least looking into things, or at least understanding, especially if you're looking for a new job or you're looking to go work at the top companies like you guys work with. Like I have your portfolio set up. Like you guys have worked with some huge global brands, right? And if these people are coming to you looking for certain skill sets and you want to go work for these big names, well, you need to spend some time and actually learn and update yourself to stay relevant, so these big name companies will try to seek you out, or at least call you in for an interview if you apply. Fair to say?
Sure. It is.
So we are coming kind of the end of the show, but I am kind of curious to know, what do you kind of tell people that are actually actively kind of maybe at a job they're happy with, but maybe looking for something in the next couple of years? Is there anything they can kind of do? Do you guys, or do you guys kind of take people that are maybe saying, like, one day I would really like to do this job at this type of company? Do you work with people like that, or how do you kind of tell people that aren't really looking but are kind of, in some ways, I think you should always kind of be looking to upgrade, right? If you have it really great, then
Right.
It's harder to move on. But what do you kind of tell people around that?
Yeah, it's interesting. So most of the time we're reaching out to people cold. A lot of the time they don't know us. We've never talked to them. And the most basic question that we pose to people really early in our conversation is, are you open to the potential of making a change?
Okay.
Or are you open to listening to other opportunities? And I'm always amazed at the number of people that say no. I'm not interested in listening, because it never hurts to listen. So it's always a little bit mind blowing, and I understand that it might be tough for somebody to make a change, but it can't hurt you to know what's going on in the market. So that would be the first thing I would advise anybody. When a recruiter calls, at least take the call. At least listen to what the person has to say, because that's just smart, and it's not only going to cost you a few minutes of your time. When it comes to sort of what you're talking about, the question that you're asking around, what skills do they need to acquire, where do they want to take their career? A lot of people just bluntly they're not focused a lot on their ultimate end career goal. A lot of people make changes from one company to another, or from one position to another, because the opportunity presents itself, not because they're out there looking for it. So a lot of people don't even put that much thought or effort into, what's my career goal? Where do I want to go? What do I want to be someday? No matter how old somebody might be talking, that I might be talking to is, I always ask them the question, just to have some fun with it, what do you want to be when you grow up, even if they've been working for 25 years? Because everybody still thinks about their career that way. I find that to be universally true.
Interesting.
But here's a little bit of the secret sauce that we ask everybody, and this would be one thing that I would encourage anybody that's listening to this to do. It's a really simple exercise. I ask it of almost everybody that I talk to. I don't care if you're a CEO, if you're a salesperson, or whatever the case might be. But it is to really understand what it is that you're great at.
Okay.
So when I engage somebody in a conversation, I want to know what they really love to do, what they're really, really good at. And effectively what I'm trying to pull out of them is, what is the value that they can bring to another company? If they were to leave their current employer, what's the value that they bring? And a lot of people really struggle to articulate the value that they could bring to an organization, even people that have been wildly successful. And again, this is something that women often really struggle with more than men, is to look at the things that they've accomplished. And, brag is probably too strong a word, but to point at those things and say, I did this.
Right.
And most people in general, man, woman, doesn't really matter. That's a challenge for a lot of people to talk about what it is that they're good at, or what it is that they love to do. But I think that if you can have that little commercial ready to be able to talk to somebody about what it is that makes you great, you're miles ahead of your competition when it comes to the potential of at least getting into that interview process, or getting deep into that interview process.
Sure. No, I think that's actually really good advice. Is there anything else that you kind of tell people to think about, or kind of worry about, even if they're not really kind of looking?
No, I mean, I think that there's this idea out there that recruiters have this magical ability to pull people out of companies. We'll hear that from a lot of people. Oh, don't steal my people. And I got bad news for you. Recruiters don't steal anybody. Recruiters talk to enough people to be able to take advantage of helping people to advance their career or helping to put them in situations that allow them to make more money or experience more happiness. But if they're going to leave, there's a bigger problem than I happen to call them on that particular day.
Sure.
But the other thing is, I tell far more people to stay in their current job than to present them with an opportunity that I'm working on. A lot of the time, even if I'm talking to somebody that has a great background, Kevin, there's things about it that just don't make it a great fit. There's reasons that they shouldn't do it, whether it's a bad culture fit, whether it's a challenge to their quality of life that they really like, whether or not the money is worth it sometime, or maybe they're just on a career path in their current company that they really need to stay and explore. And we tell people to stay where they are a lot of the time.
Interesting. Because
that's what's best for them. And that's the thing that separates a really, really good recruiter from a really, really garbage recruiter.
Sure.
Is that a garbage recruiter is interested in what's best for them, the recruiter.
Sure.
And a good recruiter is what's interested in what's best for their client and what's best for the candidate that they're talking to.
Sure.
And if it's not in the best interest of the candidate or the client, then it shouldn't happen. And that's the distinction between good recruiter, bad recruiter.
No, I'm happy that you said that, because I'm sure we've all gotten those emails where I remember this one I got a message about a job that if you would have spent 3 seconds reading my LinkedIn profile, that I wasn't even a fit for, and I had none of the skills you were looking for. But the icing on the cake was when you told me and you wrote, it was clearly just like a copy and paste from somewhere, why I should move to the city that I was born and raised in and currently living. That was my favorite experience with the terrible recruiter. I didn't even write back because I was like, it's a waste of time. But so I'm sure we've all kind of had those experiences where, but to your point though, you can genuinely tell when somebody reaches out to you that is generally spent, a few minutes or maybe even a while looking at kind of who you are online across your different kind of profiles online to actually give you a good hey, I checked you out here and here. I understand what you're doing. I think you'd be a really good fit for this. You can clearly tell when you get contacted by a good or bad recruiter, right? So to your point,
Absolutely.
I think it does make a lot of sense to at least take a call with the good ones, right?
Yeah. You should take a call from anybody. Like you said, you're going to smoke out very quickly if you're dealing with a quality recruiter or not. And one of the most dead giveaways is if a recruiter who doesn't know anything about you, Kevin, calls up and immediately starts pitching a job. Mm-hmm. That's an indication that the recruiter is most interested in serving him or herself versus serving you. If I don't know anything about you, how can I realistically tell you that I've got the greatest job in the world for you?
Sure.
It's ridiculous.
Sure. No, I think that's great. Yeah. So, but sadly, we're coming to the end of the show. So let's close with mentioning where people can get more information about yourself and the company.
Sure. So we've got a web page like most companies do. It's valorpartners.com, and that's spelled VALOR partners, all one word, .com. If somebody wanted to reach out to me directly with questions, or maybe they've got some comment, they can certainly reach out to me directly at my email address, which is just djohnson@valorpartners.com. And if somebody wanted to get in touch with me by phone, I always welcome that. I'll even give you my direct line, which is 540-492-4250.
Perfect. Well, I really appreciate taking the time out of your day to be on the show, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you, and have a good rest of your day.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. I appreciate it.
Thanks, man. All right. Later.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. The music for the show is done by Electric Mantra. You can check them out at electricmantra.com and keep building the future.